If you've been a long-time fan or just viewer of the channel, you'd be well accustomed to the realities of samurai history, both the good and the bad. But one thing is for certain, that there are indeed examples that we do have of legendary stories of truly heroic samurai who did actually live up to the loyalty and valiant nature that we so often envision them to represent. It is this topic I want to examine here today, as we take a look at the concept of the last stand, something which of course took place during conflicts all throughout history and across the world. However, I have yet to hear of a more concentrated array of them happening than within the storied history of pre-modern Japan. So, what I want to do here is discuss several of them in detail, ranking what I believe to be is the top 5 greatest examples of samurai last stands, as we look to see who it was that fought, what they were fighting for, and what great impact was felt by their actions, both in the immediate aftermath and many years to come. Each number higher up in the ranking will go to reflect just how significant or well-remembered the event was and what impact is perhaps still felt to this day. There are many choices for this, and you might be surprised to see which ones may or may not have made the list. And I do need to mention that I have created several rules I've put out to follow as an outline for how I chose these particular stories. Firstly is that there obviously needs to be a numerically superior enemy attacking a smaller force. Secondly, there needs to be at least one key recognizable leader on the defending side, someone we can more easily look to analyze for their motives. And lastly, this key leading figure did not attempt to flee and instead has to have either died in combat or through seppuku, therefore making this truly a last stand. So, with that said, let's jump in with number 5. Minamoto no Yorimasa at the First Battle of Uji. This story is famous because it is believed that it perhaps set a precedent for many samurai to come. The First Battle of Uji in 1180 was really the first clash of the legendary Genpei War. In threat of the increasing power the Taira clan held over the emperor and the court, many began to scheme in hopes of toppling them before it was too late. Thus, the imperial prince Mochihito began to coordinate with Minamoto no Yorimasa, who began amassing a force to oppose the Taira. However, this plot was soon revealed to the Taira, who then sought to capture the rebel prince. This forced Yorimasa into action, moving his small force out to safeguard the prince's retreat. Once the two armies finally met just south of Kyoto, it was clear that the Minamoto would not be able to hold out for long against the incoming tide of the Taira advance. In hopes of slowing them down by halting them on the opposite side of the Uji River, Minamoto forces began to tear up the planks of the Uji Bridge. Yet it was soon discovered that the river itself was shallow enough that the Taira could in fact ford the river and take the fight to the opposite bank. Fighting desperately to the last man and with no hope of escape, Yorimasa chose to do something which would echo for centuries to come. In complete defiance, he found a solitary space and used one of his blades to disembowel himself. Legend says that this is perhaps the first real time a samurai would commit seppuku. Later, Prince Mochihito would be apprehended by the Taira and executed as well. However, the impact of Yorimasa's brave attempt to save the imperial prince, coupled with not only his death but also the prince's death, sent further shockwaves through the nation, officially beginning the Genpei War. Yet, as we know, beyond just the war itself, Yorimasa's actions would continue to have a lasting impact throughout the remainder of samurai history. Number 4. The Taira clan at Dan-no-ura. So we've seen the beginning of the Genpei War. Now we turn to its very end. The Battle of Dan-no-ura was the climactic finish to the war, a spectacle like no other, in which a great clash at sea would seal the fate of the nation for generations to come. It was here Taira no Munemori would make his desperate final attempt to turn the tide of the war. If he failed, all was lost for the Taira. They would meet at sea, at Dan-no-ura, between the crossing from the islands of Honshu to Kyushu. The Taira were outnumbered, but they were known as masters of the sea and possessed superior knowledge of the tides. While opposed to them, the great Minamoto no Yoshitsune amassed his own naval force to crush them. The Taira would also take to the sea with the child emperor Antoku, along with the imperial regalia, which signified his legitimacy as the true emperor of Japan, a Taira-born son, and the heart of the conflict itself. The battle began in somewhat of favorable conditions for the Taira, as their understanding of the local tides allowed them to rapidly maneuver their ships, raining volleys of arrows down upon the decks of the Minamoto vessels. Soon enough, things began to fall apart, as Yoshitsune ordered his own archers to begin targeting the oarsmen and navigators aboard the enemy ships. This, coupled with the turning of the tides and boarding actions by the Minamoto vessels, began to throw the Taira into chaos. The situation worsened when a prominent Taira commander also became a turncoat and switched sides to join the Minamoto. Things were now becoming so far against the Taira that defeat was certain. It started with the grandmother of the child Emperor Antoku, who wrapped the boy in her arms and leapt into the waters below to drown themselves rather than be captured. This began a mass incident of all surrounding Taira forces doing the same, either carrying anchors, strapping on extra armor, or just carrying other heavy objects. They all leapt into the water below to defiantly drown themselves in the face of the Minamoto victory. Their horrifying and storied end is one which continues to be felt to this day, not only through the various tales of their great sacrifice, through records of the battle and other intriguing legends such as Hoichi the Earless, but also through the very crabs of the region, who many believe are marked by the faces of the Taira samurai whose bodies sunk to the depths below. Number 3. Sanada Yukimura at Osaka. We now move forward several hundred years to the very close of the epic Sengoku period. It was here Tokugawa Ieyasu, the man who had at long last fully brought Japan into a new era of peace and stability and who had established his own mighty new shogunate, was on the warpath to destroy his final rival, the young heir to the Toyotomi family, Toyotomi Hideyori. In a series of clashes surrounding the great Osaka castle, Hideyori attempted to withstand the endless tide of the Bakufu forces, and he had ample supply of skilled loyalists who had come forth to fight in his name. One such figure was Sanada Nobushige, known more commonly today as Yukimura. Yukimura would prove to be one of the most significant leaders of the Osaka conflict and garnered such incredible titles as Japan's #1 warrior and the last Sengoku hero. Although Yukimura fought a losing fight against the shogunate and in the name of his lord Hideyori, he would press on valiantly into a legendary end. It was here, at the final clash at Tennoji, just outside Osaka Castle, where Yukimura's efforts nearly broke the shogunate line. Yet, when the battle swung back in the Tokugawa favor, and realizing that all hope was lost, he would make one last desperate charge to slay Ieyasu himself. Ferociously, he tore through the enemy lines with his personal guard in tow, hacking and slashing his way to the former shogun, until he managed to arrive just inches from him. Yet, sadly, Yukimura would fall just short of his target, and Ieyasu was able to escape, as Yukimura was held back by surrounding Tokugawa soldiers. However, some legends say that he may have succeeded in at least wounding Ieyasu, while others go so far as to state that he indeed did kill him, and that the death was later covered up. In actuality, Yukimura's final charge, although awe-inspiring, was unfortunately a failure, and Yukimura would die honorably fighting to the death. His story is etched into the annals of history as truly one of the greatest samurai leaders and warriors of all time, as he embodied the last epic spirit of vengeance and willpower to close out the violent and eventful Sengoku period. Number 2. Kusunoki Masashige at Minatogawa. Moving back several centuries now, we come to another valiant warrior who too would show tremendous loyalty in the face of sure annihilation. It occurred in 1336 when a new war had broken out between the supporters of the restored Emperor Go-Daigo and those loyal to Ashikaga Takauji, who sought to dethrone Go-Daigo and re-establish firm samurai rule over Japan and the imperial throne. Go-Daigo had been the catalyst who had pressed forth to destroy the old Kamakura shogunate with many loyalists, including the Ashikaga who had backed his cause. Yet after his victory and subsequent Kinmu restoration that saw Go-Daigo restored to full power, he attempted to weaken the grip of the samurai over the nation, much to the displeasure of the warrior class, this leading to a new war. In this new conflict, one of the most loyal and skilled commanders who continued to support Go-Daigo happened to be a samurai by the name of Kusunoki Masashige. Masashige saw great success against the emperor's enemies, but he could not ultimately stop the tide of the Ashikaga advance. By 1336, Masashige suggested that the emperor withdraw from Kyoto so that the Ashikaga could move in, thus allowing the loyalist forces to trap them inside the city while continuing to hound them with guerrilla warfare. However, Go-Daigo refused this idea, never accepting the thought of giving up the imperial city, and instead had dispatched another loyalist commander by the name of Nita Yoshitsara to confront the Ashikaga forces. Soon Masashige was ordered to join him in the field, yet he knew this coming battle would be sheer suicide. Masashige, however, was a loyalist to the last, and followed the will of the emperor despite knowing it could mean his death and the doom of the imperial cause. He would clash with the Ashikaga at the Battle of Minatogawa, where Masashige would give his all despite the overwhelming odds against him, with his forces only perhaps half the size of the enemy. Masashige would fight tooth and nail until finally realizing the time had come. He would find a secluded spot to commit seppuku. According to legend, before his death, Masashige asked his brother who had accompanied him what his thoughts were in their final moments, and what he wished for in his afterlife. To which his brother replied that he wished he could be reborn 7 times so that he could destroy the emperor's enemies. Masashige agreed with this sentiment, and they both disemboweled themselves. The stoic loyalty of Masashige has gone on to influence generations to come, as he would even become one of the most significant examples of absolute loyalty to the emperor during the age of Imperial Japan. Before we jump into the number 1 slot, I do want to give some quick honorable mentions. Epic last stands that I did heavily consider adding to the list but ultimately did not decide to choose. So if this list was a top 10 instead of a top 5, you can say that these all would have been there. These were the assassination of Shogun Ashikaga Yoshiteru, Okabe Motonobu at the siege of Takatenjin, Oda Nobunaga at the Honnoji incident, Torimoto Tara at the siege of Fushimi, and brave Western Army commanders such as Shima Sakon and Otani Yoshitsugu at the Battle of Sekigahara. But now, number 1. The standing death of Saito Musashibo Benkei. Although he is not technically a samurai, but instead a warrior monk, and may be more myth than reality, the legacy of Benkei and his heroic final battle is perhaps the greatest story of a last stand in all of Japanese history. Benkei, who was a mountain of a man, had come into the faithful service of Minamoto no Yoshitsune, a valiant and beloved commander who together with Benkei had fought through the Genpei War and paved the way to the Minamoto victory. However, Yoshitsune's half-brother, Minamoto no Yoritomo, the new shogun and the man who truly ruled the Minamoto family, had grown increasingly suspicious of Yoshitsune and the great respect he commanded. He feared that Yoshitsune may one day attempt to seize power for himself, and there were awful rumors circulating which only worsened this potential threat. So he did the most logical thing any real samurai lord would. He declared Yoshitsune an enemy of the state and ordered his death. Benkei, Yoshitsune, and his other loyal followers all went into hiding, evading Yoritomo's loyalists at every turn, until finally, in 1189, they became trapped at the manor of a friendly Fujiwara lord in Mutsu province. It was here, in the face of hordes of enemies, Benkei stood resolute atop a bridge which crossed over to the compound where Yoshitsune was. Wave after wave of samurai charged the bridge, but one after another, through sweeps of Benkei's mighty naginata, they were all either slain or thrown from the bridge. Benkei was an immovable force that the soldiers could not get around. Eventually, after scores had become either injured or killed, the samurai fell back to allow their archers to take aim at him. Riddled with arrows, Benkei miraculously still stood. All were frozen with terror, looking at the mighty warrior who still held the bridge, until finally they started to approach him again, and realized that although he was still standing straight up, Benkei was actually now finally dead. He had given his lord Yoshitsune the time he needed inside the compound to commit seppuku. The legend of Benkei's standing death is a tale that has been passed down from generation to generation, influencing countless samurai with tales of not only his absolute loyalty, but his tremendous willpower to not only hold the bridge, but also remain standing defiant after death. The story of Benkei lives on eternally. So, those are my picks for the top 5 greatest samurai last stands. Do you agree with them, or are there others you think should have made the list instead? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. And as always, thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell if you enjoyed this video and found it to be most informative.